Quick question. Do you know someone, a friend, a coworker, maybe even a family member, who is smart, successful, capable of holding down a demanding job, and also believes something wildly conspiratorial? Here's the uncomfortable truth. This isn't rare. And it's not because that person is stupid. For decades, we've told ourselves a comforting story that conspiracy theories are for gullible people, uneducated people, people who just don't think critically. But that story is wrong. Research into conspiratorial thinking has found something far more unsettling. Intelligence barely predicts who believes these theories. What actually predicts it is something much more human: how we handle fear, uncertainty, and the feeling of powerlessness. Today, we're going inside the psychology of conspiracy theories, not to mock the people who believe them, but to understand the very real, very human mechanisms that create belief in the first place, and why, once someone believes, it's so incredibly hard to talk them out of it. Let's start by killing the myth. If conspiracy belief was simply about intelligence, we'd expect it to be concentrated among people with less education, lower analytical skills, maybe less exposure to information. But that's not what the data shows. Doctors, engineers, lawyers, academics, people whose entire careers depend on analytical thinking, fall into conspiratorial belief systems at meaningful rates. In some cases, highly educated people are actually more effective at building elaborate, internally consistent conspiracy theories because they're skilled at researching, connecting dots, and constructing arguments that sound rigorous. The skill isn't missing. It's just being pointed in the wrong direction. Psychologists call this motivated reasoning. Instead of using our intelligence to find the truth, we often use it to defend a conclusion we already emotionally committed to. Think of intelligence less like a compass pointing toward truth and more like a very skilled lawyer, one who can be hired to argue almost any case, including one that isn't true. Smart people aren't immune to this. If anything, they can be better at it, because they're better at making a flawed belief sound rational, well-researched, and airtight. So if it's not about IQ, what is it about? It comes down to how our brains are wired to process a chaotic, uncertain world, and that wiring goes back much further than social media or even modern history. Human brains are, at their core, pattern detection machines. This served us incredibly well throughout evolution. If you heard rustling in the grass, it was safer to assume it was a predator and be wrong than to assume it was the wind and be eaten. Our ancestors who over-detected danger survived. Our ancestors who shrugged things off often didn't. This bias, seeing intentional patterns even in random noise, is called apophenia. Alongside it is something called agency detection, our tendency to assume that events happen because someone did them on purpose, rather than by accident or coincidence. It's why ancient humans assumed thunder was a god's anger, rather than pure atmospheric physics. It's why early civilizations built entire religious systems around the idea that natural disasters were punishments, not random weather patterns. We are, fundamentally, uncomfortable with randomness. We want an author behind the chaos. We want someone to blame, or someone to credit. Conspiracy theories exploit this ancient wiring perfectly. They take random, tragic, or complicated events and offer something our brains desperately crave: intention, a hidden hand, a someone who did this on purpose, for a reason, with a plan. That's psychologically far more satisfying than the alternative, that terrible things sometimes just happen, for messy, uncoordinated, mundane reasons involving incompetence, chance, and chaos. Researchers who study conspiracy belief have identified 3 core psychological needs that these theories satisfy, and understanding them explains almost everything about why they spread, and why they spread fastest during specific moments in a person's life. The first is the need for control. When people feel powerless during economic instability, health crises, job loss, or political upheaval, conspiracy theories offer a strange kind of comfort. If a secret group is controlling everything, then at least someone is in control. A world run by hidden puppet masters is, ironically, less frightening than a world that's simply random and out of anyone's hands. Believing in a conspiracy can feel like taking back a small piece of control, simply by knowing what's really going on. The second is the need for certainty. Our brains hate ambiguity. Living with unanswered questions is psychologically uncomfortable. Conspiracy theories offer clean, simple explanations for complicated events. Instead of accepting we don't fully know why this happened and we may never know, a conspiracy theory says, here's exactly why, and here's exactly who's responsible. That certainty is psychologically addictive, even when it's false, because a confident wrong answer often feels better than an honest uncertain one. The third is the need for belonging. This one gets overlooked, but it might be the most powerful of the three. Conspiracy communities offer identity, camaraderie, and a sense of being in the know, an enlightened few who see the truth that the sleepy, unquestioning masses don't. There's a real emotional high in feeling like you're part of a select group who gets it. And once someone feels that sense of community and identity, leaving isn't just admitting they were wrong about a belief. It's giving up a social world, a community, sometimes even friendships and relationships built entirely around that shared belief. Control, certainty, belonging. Notice that none of these require low intelligence. They require being human. Here's where it gets even more counterintuitive. You'd think the solution is simple. Show someone the facts, and they'll update their beliefs. But in reality, this often backfires. Literally. It's called the backfire effect. When people are presented with evidence that contradicts a deeply held belief, especially one tied to their identity, they don't always update their thinking. Sometimes they dig in harder. The correction feels like an attack, not on the idea, but on them personally, and on the community they belong to. This happens because beliefs, especially conspiratorial ones, aren't purely intellectual positions. They're emotional anchors. They're tied to identity, to community, to a person's sense of making sense of the world. When you challenge the belief, you're not just challenging a fact. You're challenging who that person is, what they've built their worldview around, and who they belong to. And people will defend their identity far more fiercely than they'll defend a fact. This is why simply yelling, "That's not true, here's the data," almost never works in practice. It's not an information problem. It's a psychological and emotional one. And treating it like a debate about facts almost guarantees that the other person walks away more entrenched than before. Now add modern technology into the mix, and you get a system almost perfectly engineered to accelerate conspiratorial thinking. Social media algorithms are built to maximize engagement, and outrage, fear, and certainty are extremely engaging emotions. So the algorithm doesn't show you balanced information. It shows you more of what already captured your attention, pulling you deeper and deeper into content that confirms what you already believe. This creates echo chambers, where a person's entire information diet slowly narrows until every voice they hear agrees with them. Combine that with online communities built specifically around a shared belief, and you get a self-reinforcing loop. The belief gives you community. The community reinforces the belief, and the algorithm keeps feeding you more of both, day after day, video after video, until an alternate reality starts to feel more coherent and more real than the mainstream one. It's not that people are seeking out lies, it's that the information environment itself has been quietly reshaped around what keeps us scrolling, and certainty and fear keep us scrolling extremely well. In a strange way, we're not just consuming conspiracy content anymore. The content is being custom built, moment by moment, to keep us there. There's one more powerful psychological quirk worth understanding: proportionality bias. This is our instinct that big events must have big, proportional causes. When something massive and world-altering happens, a president is assassinated, a pandemic sweeps the globe, a market collapses overnight, it feels almost unsatisfying to accept a small, mundane, or chaotic explanation. Our brains resist the idea that a single, unstable individual, a random mutation, or a chain of ordinary human errors could cause something so enormous. So instead, we search for an explanation that feels equally big: a massive cover-up, a powerful hidden organization, a scale of cause that matches the scale of the consequence. It's emotionally intuitive. It just feels right. But it's not how the real world usually works. Most catastrophic events in history trace back to a surprisingly small, chaotic, and unglamorous set of causes: a miscommunication, an overlooked warning sign, one person's bad decision at the wrong moment. Our brains just don't want to accept that something so consequential could come from something so small. So if facts alone don't work, what does? Psychologists who study this suggest a very different approach than debate. Instead of attacking the belief directly, start by validating the underlying emotional need, the fear, the loss of control, the desire for certainty that's driving the belief in the first place. Ask genuine questions instead of presenting counterarguments. Curiosity tends to lower defensiveness in a way that confrontation never does, because it doesn't feel like an attack. It also helps to focus on the process the person used to arrive at a conclusion, rather than the conclusion itself. Questions like, "What would change your mind?" or "Where did you first come across this?" encourage someone to examine how they know what they know, rather than simply being told they're wrong, which almost always triggers defensiveness instead of reflection. And maybe most importantly, preserve the relationship. Because for many people, if believing something means keeping their community and their sense of belonging, then the strongest antidote isn't a better argument. It's a stronger, safer alternative source of connection and certainty in their life. People rarely think their way out of a conspiracy belief. More often, they need to feel safe enough and connected enough to let it go. Conspiracy theories aren't really about facts. They're about fear, control, certainty, and belonging, some of the most fundamental human needs there are. And that's exactly why smart, capable, rational people are just as vulnerable to them as anyone else, especially during moments of fear, instability, or isolation. Understanding this doesn't mean excusing harmful misinformation, and it doesn't mean every belief deserves equal respect. But it does mean we might get further by approaching believers with curiosity instead of contempt. Because underneath almost every conspiracy theory is a very human person trying to make sense of a world that often feels frightening, chaotic, and out of control.